Welcome to the Flow State podcast. I am Flow State founder and managing director, Stuart P. Turner. In this 5-episode mini-series, we're talking about the implications of AI, cutting through the hype to talk about real-world use cases, real examples, and what it means to people in their day-to-day jobs. So, Brooke, thanks for joining. Welcome to the podcast. By way of an intro for people who may not be aware of your reputation already, so you're the founder and director of The Contented Copywriter, branding pro, published children's author. Is there anything else that you think people need to know about you before we dive in?
That sounds like a pretty great intro to me. Thanks for having me.
No, it's a pleasure. I'm super excited to talk to you actually, because obviously as a writer, you're directly in the firing line for, kind of the whole AI juggernaut, if you believe the hype. So I thought it'd be good to kick off with obviously the question that everybody is asking. Is this the robot revolution happening? Do we all need to quit our jobs and retrain as like a carpenter, for example, or something that cannot be reproduced at the moment? Like, what are your thoughts based on what you're hearing so far?
Oh gosh, everyone's gone crazy. The whole world's gone mad, and look, I think. So the first big thing to say is that it is still early days. I mean, yes, everything kind of kicked off towards the end of last year with ChatGPT 3 and then 4 and then yes, everyone's kind of gone into this frenzy, which is still swirling around, the short answer is no. I don't think we're all going to be out of our job.
That's reassuring.
I still think there is a place for really well thought out, really well crafted content and words. But it really is going to change things, and has already started to change things. And I think it's about, and I think we're all still learning. So I'm a firm believer that anyone who says that they're an expert, unless they're actually employed by ChatGPT, or any of its associates, they're not an expert yet. So, it's still early days and we're still all figuring it out.
Well, I think very reassuring, first of all, to hear that you're not worried, which is great. And I would tend to agree, like, despite what you might read on LinkedIn in particular about people becoming experts in AI that they probably don't really understand. Talk to me about how are you using it in your in your business or your team at the moment? Do you have any kind of quality concerns? Like, I'm keen to get your way more expert than mine opinion on this, given that you're wordsmithing every day. Like, how are you feeling about it, and have you found it to be useful at all so far?
Yeah, so I think there are things there are ways in which it's really useful, and there are ways in which it needs to be really carefully and closely managed. So the short answer is yes, we are using it in very specific ways. And look, we're probably a little bit different to a lot of agencies out there in that we only employ, senior writers, essentially. So our team is full of, of super experienced writers for whom at this stage the AI isn't really creating massive shortcuts for, because we can do a better job more quickly than it would take to actually put all the prompts in and get what you need to out of it. In saying that, though, it's like anything. It's another. So our experience is probably fairly unique. In saying that, though, it is a tool which we absolutely will and have to add into our repertoire. So it's like anything. Whenever there is a new piece of machinery or a new new piece of technology for any craftsman, you kind of have to look at it and you go, okay, how am I going to understand it? How am I going to learn it? And how am I going to integrate it? So there's things that AI does really, really well. And some of those things include, content ideation. So it can be really good just to
Mm.
get some ideas going. It's can be fun for headline inspiration. I mean, some of them are pretty way off, but often if we're stuck, we might put in some. We always give alternatives when we're sharing content with client. We'll always give alternative headlines, and so sometimes we need a few. So we'll ask it, and some of the ideas are really great. And it's really good for curing blank page-itis. We all know what it's like when we have to write something and we're staring at a blank screen and the words just won't come. So it's really good for actually starting out a pretty decent first draft, which can then be really thoroughly edited and reshaped and remolded and checked into something that is, polished and shines and is decent content. So those are the sorts of things that we're using for it now. It's also good for, for research as well, for getting some, for scouring the internet essentially for you and pulling together some research, which you think can then turn into insights. I think the things that we have to be really, really careful about are things like, accuracy of information. So there's a lot of instances where discovering things which aren't accurate, things which aren't properly referenced as well. So we need to do checking because it's like everything on the internet, like, believe it or not, shock horror, what we have on the internet isn't all true.
Don't tell me that you're about to say that everything on the internet is not 100% true and accurate. That seems like a wild claim to me.
I know it's remarkable, but AI doesn't necessarily have the ability to distinguish. And the other, so there's accuracy, there's referencing, and there's also, getting the right tone. Now, there are lots of prompts that you can do, and you can kind of train it to kind of get there. But it takes a lot of work, and there's still something lacking in the spontaneity and the nuance that still needs work so that it doesn't sound like a robot. So, certainly it can get to a certain standard, but it still needs that work to get it to where to a really quality piece of work. So, yeah, that's the kind of ways in which we are and aren't using it.
Yeah, okay. I think it's interesting to hear you talk through that, actually, because it's come up quite a bit in the other conversations that we've had, both on this show and also, in kind of in life outside of this, that the points you just made to kind of play those back are like, the quality is not really there. I think largely due to the body of information that it has access to base this stuff off, and that kind of generic, feel is definitely there in my experience as well, of like, you can ask it as much as you like, but you're always going to get a pretty stock-ish response with a few different, kind of, I suppose, bells and whistles specific to whatever you've prompted. So I think, it's interesting just to hear that you having the same experience, because I would tend to agree. I think it can help with efficiency and the mental block, but I don't really feel like you get like you're not getting a sort of Ferrari out of it, are you? You're getting like a Toyota Corolla, basically, is this, I suppose, the car analogy I would throw in there.
And a 1990 Mitsubishi Mirage, which was,
yeah, exactly, yeah. It's fine for a certain use case, but you're not going to drive it around to impress people, are you? Basically, is the short version.
That's a really good way to put it. It will give you something that will get you from A to B, but you're not going to want to be telling your friends about it. You're not going to be wanting to go up and impress people with it, and I think that's a really great distinction.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I'm incredibly biased as I'm in the same space as you. In that, I would hope that we're up in that, upper echelon of doing work that's above the baseline. But I think that's a really important thing to call out, because there's obviously a lot of discussion about, who or what could be replaced by these tools, and it sounds like you agree that is very much kind of jumping the gun at this stage. Like, would you say that's accurate? Like, I don't think we're ready just to be like, fire those 10 people over there because this chatbot, can do all their jobs. Like, I don't see that being a reality anytime soon, personally.
Yeah, and look, it's not. I think that it's not without risk, right? Because, and you know, you and I have kind of chatted about this before, and that what sort of one of the things we have to be really mindful of is the future generation of writers. Yeah, because
Mm,
when you're learning, you're making mistakes and you're not sometimes getting the facts right, and you know the quality isn't quite there, and you don't quite understand the nuance of brand voice, and that's what happens when you're learning, and you know you're a junior to midweight writer, and you're learning the ropes, and the reality is that that's kind of how well the bots can write at the moment is that kind of junior to midweight level. So there is something to be said for that. I think we need to be really mindful of how we train, and you know and nourish the next generation of writers, because they'll be coming up against that and may not necessarily have the ability to practice and learn, and they're going to have to get really good really quick. So I think we need to really think about that. But yeah, in terms of just saying a blanket, okay, this whole industry is going to be, you know, out of a job within the next couple of years. Look, I think we still need to be onto it, but I think that you ultimately can't replace, you know, human connection, and I think that's what's going to be of greater value is the humanness in it all, because you know things like, so explainer content, for example. So if we think about the different types of content that's out there, you know, explainer content is really helpful content that, you know, most brands, well, all brands should have some form of it where they're explaining, you know, things and concepts which make it easier for their audience to understand. Now, um, ChatGPT can do that pretty well. Like you can ask it, explain, you know, quantum physics in
yeah.
4 easy dot points, and it'll do it. And you're like, cool, okay.
Yeah.
But what so you know, perhaps the value of that sort of content will be less, but I think the value will get even higher on real human stories, you know, real perspectives by real people that exists on the internet, but only from certain people. There's such
Yeah.
opportunity for more of those stories and more perspectives and more lived experience, and that's something that, you know, can't be automated. That has to be something that's lived and then shared and teased out by the right writer in the right way.
Yeah, that I think is another super interesting area that I haven't seen much discussion of this in the, you know, the sort of, you know, the main, I suppose the mainstream sort of coverage of this stuff, which is exactly what you just described. Like the human experience side of things is very skewed, like as I'm sure you would agree, based on the current data set that like the language models have been trained on. And I was listening to I've been like shamelessly promoting Hard Fork, this podcast that I listen to. It's not the only one I listen to; it's just really good. But they had one of the colleagues of one of the hosts who works at the paper that they write for. Basically doing like a food segment where they were like, okay, well, we're going to I'll share all the details, by the way, but below the episode. But they were like, okay, we're going to ask AI, I think they were using ChatGPT to put a menu together, and then they'll just cook that whole menu for, I think they did it for Thanksgiving, and it came out with all these like super random kind of combinations and stuff that I think the gist was it turned out quite well. Like the episode, I'll send you the episode because it's super interesting to watch, of the cooking show that they did. But the lady who was hosting it was basically like, oh, but when we asked it for things like, you know, how would you put together like a, you know, a Malaysian dish or like an Indian dish or something, like Chat's idea of like, you know, Malaysian food was pretty limited and like flat, and they were like, oh, you know, like for Indian food it's like just chuck in some garam masala and make some
Mm.
rice, and that's like Indian food. It really highlighted in a really nice way both of those points you made, which is like, you know, it doesn't really understand the depth of the culture even from a food perspective, and you'd assume there's a fair amount of Indian recipes floating around online.
Mm.
And yeah, the second part was like, but it doesn't give you any of the human parts. Like, it doesn't tell you what to taste for or smell for, or how to prepare a recipe properly. So I found that quite interesting, because a lot of people obviously have been using it for this kind of practical stuff, like how do I cook blah blah blah, or what's my weekly shop look like. But as you said, it doesn't replace having like your mum tell you a recipe, for example, and just walk you through it. It's it was interesting to listen to.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things in there. I mean, certainly from a cultural perspective, it really is, and I guess that's a slightly concerning thing about it, and you hope that it does change, that it's a very limited view of the world currently, so it doesn't understand cultural nuance. I mean, you ask it to and I've tried, you ask it to put some Australian colloquialisms through any content, and it's just
how did that go?
like the worst episode of The Simpsons, coming to us. It's so bad.
Brilliant.
And so there's that, which it might eventually learn, and you hope that it gets a bit better at. But there's also, how could it really ever understand what it's like to stand in the Australian outback and feel that experience of, the hot dust and the scorching heat, and the ground that hasn't experienced rain in 5 years. Like, those are the things that you can really only get by talking to people and by a really clever wordsmith crafting those words in a way that just draws you in and just puts you there and in that moment. You know what I mean? Like, there's
totally
difference. So and to your cooking example, it can't pass on that recipe and say, I learned this when my nonna was in the kitchen with me, and she would smack my hands as I say, get out, you're doing it wrong, and she would show me how to knead it and and whatever it was, and that story and that tenderness that comes through, again, that's how we connect, and those are the things that will become of greater value, those stories.
Yeah, no, totally. I think I've got another funny example. Well, it was part funny, part tragic example for you, actually. But I again, coming back to your own experience as an author and a copywriter, I completely agree with you, and I think I'm a big fan of. I've probably told you this already. Like, a big Cormac McCarthy fan, who comes from a long tradition of very wordy kind of romantically kind of inclined writers, and you would never, whether you like him or not, like the way he puts a book together, and even just one sentence about to your point about the Australian outback, he does kind of a similar thing with the American sort of southwestern Mexican border, and it's like I would never in a million years expect something like a ChatGPT type model to be able to construct a description of the world like that, because it just physically will never have that experience. And it might randomly get there one day, but it's not going to be through design. It'll be through sort of random happenstance, just because it happens to hit on the right combination of things, I guess. Like, I think I agree with you. I don't think you can ever build in the human connection. I think that's kind of a bridge too far based on what I've seen currently.
Yes. Yeah. And I think you're right. I think, and that's the thing, it can strike on these things, and as you say, it can be happenstance, and sometimes what it comes up with is brilliant, and you're like, far out, that's amazing. But then it takes a human to be able to discern what is good and what is not. And I think that's where our role will come in as well, as curators, as discerners, to go, this is really interesting, and this bit isn't really, uninteresting, and be able to tell the difference.
And look, I think a big theme of this series has been obviously trying to cut through all the hype and noise around it, and just kind of get down to what's actually happening. And I think this is where there's a big sort of general public consciousness misunderstanding about how models like chat actually work, like these predictive models, where they are in fact only predicting like the next most likely thing to happen, based on whatever you tell it and the information it has. So, from that point of view, it's not that surprising that they're not very sophisticated. Well, not that they're not very sophisticated, but the output is not as human perhaps as you might expect, because all it's doing is saying, well, exactly as you just said, Brooke saying she needs 5 different headlines. She's given me 3 or 4. She said that it should sound like this, this, and this. So, the predictive part's amazing, obviously, because it's like, well, the next most likely thing should be this or this based on that information. But it's not exactly like real artificial intelligence at this point in the narrowest sense of the definition, right? Where it is not intelligent. It's just, performing a lot of complex predictions at the same time. And that, like, I guess this is where I think the discussions are a bit maybe at odds in sort of the mainstream side of things versus what's actually happening from a technical point of view. Because I know a lot of people are worried that we might get to a, we've unleashed a consciousness like Skynet style on everybody. But the current tools that are available just seem very far away from that to me. Like, do you think that that's the case as well, or are you concerned that we might be dancing along the razor's edge at the moment, Brooke? Like, what are your thoughts?
Look, I think we'd all be inhuman if we didn't feel worried at some point. You know what I mean? Because we've all watched enough dystopian movies. And I mean, that's like my favorite genre, by the way.
I mean, surely everyone's at least seen The Matrix at this point, right? Like, at the very least.
And when these things happen, there is this sense of like, okay, things are changing fast, and should we feel concerned? And like my honest belief is that we look at the here and now and we go, okay, right now they are no way near as sophisticated in terms of their output. I'm not saying it's not sophisticated technology. I mean, it's quite mind-blowing, but in terms of the language and the sophistication of that, of what comes out of it, it's still not going to be, taking everyone's jobs just yet. Do we have to be mindful of it? Do we need to find ways to work with it? Absolutely. And I think that's also based on demand. I am seeing clients, it's coming into briefs now, content strategy. Consider how we may use AI in the implementation of our plans. So that's
interesting.
So we have to demonstrate how we might do that. And, there are ways that we are, strategically integrating it into some of the work that we do. So I think there's a role for it. But, yeah, I think the fear-mongering isn't helpful. And I think that there is a more pragmatic way to move forward through it.
Yeah, look, I agree with you. I think, there's a lot of, flapping of hands, stroke, clutching of strings of pearls, if you want to use a classic examples at the moment, that isn't very useful. But look, I think you just reminded me, I was going to ask you this earlier. So coming back to, that human connection and exactly what you just talked about. Obviously, you've written... one two books so far?
One has been published, and then yes, hopefully there will be another one published soon.
All right. So, thinking about that experience, everyone's had this, right, where you just sit down with somebody and they read you like a kid's book. And as I'm sure you remember from the episode of Black Books on this subject, everyone thinks it's really easy to write a kid's book, but it is in fact probably one of the harder stories to actually write, because they're deceptively simple. Do you ever think like someone's going to be sitting down, you'd be a little kid sat on their grandma or granddad's knee reading an AI written children's book? Like, will they ever get there, or like, do you not think we'll be able to?
Probably there will be
that?
There absolutely will be books that have been produced by AI. I have no doubt. And look, they will probably be explainer, or I don't know. So that like, there's a lot of books out there at the moment that are written to help constructively guide children into behaving in a certain way or understanding something differently or what have you. That was kind of the original. If you think back to the original fairy tales, that was the role of them. That was to guide children or scare them in many cases into
yeah,
behaving in
like
certain ways.
don't run off into the woods, alone.
Yeah, yeah,
The classic example.
yeah. So, like just kind of taking that, I don't know, inspiration and running with it. Like I wouldn't be surprised if there is AI generated explainer books that that talk them through difficult concepts, and
Yeah, that's interesting.
try to guide in terms of certain certain whatever's behaviors or whatever. But I think so. So yes, and I think that, funnily enough, the that kind of literature is only increasing in children's books. There's a great demand for, and they're really helpful books. Don't get me wrong. Ones that explain, challenging concepts or big ideas to kids. What I try to do with my books is to have them very centered around the children's experience. So lots of fun and lots of silliness and lots of little micro moments. So my book, for example, is about the fun and the silliness that two siblings can get up to, and it's
cool.
much about rather than being instructive about how they should get on or how the older one needs to understand that there's this big change in the relationship coming, it's more about what the joy and fun and silliness that their new little buddy's going to bring and what they'll get up to, right? So it's centered around little moments around the house, and that's not anything that an AI could write, because they're not in there, watching when, one of the lines in the books is rumble, tumble, bang and crash, bandage knees and hugs on laps. The AI doesn't know that kids get into squabbles and then there's a bang and then there's a wail and then the Band-Aids fix everything, a hug from and a Band-Aid fixes everything. That little moment, like, Bot doesn't know that. They don't expect that. They don't know what it's like to do snow angels with their, brother or sister and stare up into the night sky. So yeah, I have no doubt there'll be some that will be written by AI in the future. That's a really long way of saying there'll be some that will be written by AI. But they can live in our homes and understand the tenderness of those little moments.
I think that's a really eloquent way of putting it, Brooke, to be honest, though, because you're bringing out the secret romantic in me describing things like this. But I think it is exactly that. It's like, some people are perfectly happy with the dry cracker sort of version of life, right? Where maybe they haven't had those experiences, or maybe they don't relate to them in the same way. But people hearing you talk through that, especially anyone who's a mother or parent, would be like, yes, that immediately resonates with me as if I've had toddlers, and you've probably had that exact experience many, many times. Like, you just, I agree with you. I think it's very hard to authentically replicate that without having done it right. Like, you can tell that a person's been involved.
Yeah.
Which is quite funny, just kind of circling back around to the industry aspects of this. I was reading a couple of maybe two opposing examples here, a couple of articles about this. One which was about testing AI in advertising, and apparently like AI beat like a group of advertising professionals who couldn't tell the difference between AI generated ads and human written ones in some recent kind of just amusing awards thing, to summarize this. But reading through that, I was like, I'm genuinely not that surprised, because the advertising side of the internet has become so, sort of myopic and functional that there's barely any room for being creative in like a, 100-character sort of headline or whatever. But then at the opposite end of the spectrum, I was reading another article this week about how all these, kind of companies are now sort of starting to emerge into the mainstream that produce, like AI companions for people the majority are AI girlfriends for, you know, lonely men, which is partly funny, partly tragic. But a lot of the commentary about this was exactly what you were describing, which is while you can replicate on paper, you know, the sort of aspects of companionship, like you can talk to somebody and they'll talk back to you, and you can, you know, have a sort of companion. It wasn't filling the emotional need for like actual human contact. And you know, obviously everyone's like, well, when can we have I assume some sort of weird robot inhabited AI person that can hang around with them. But I don't know, it just struck me as kind of a bit weird, a bit funny, a bit sad that was where people are going straight away. It's like, well, you know, we can exploit all these poor, like, lonely saps who are hanging around who don't have anyone and just sell them like a girlfriend. That seems like a great use of the technology. Like, what have you seen anything similar? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
I think that's the thing. I think what it comes down to is what do you want out of it? Like if your companion, if the companion that you're looking for is somebody who will tell you what you want to hear and you know, and fit to a very specific mold and give you, you know, some well thought out but possibly not original responses, I'm sure there's a big market for that. I really feel
I'm
like
sure there is.
like there's a lot of people probably sitting around going, "That sounds amazing. Sign me right up." And do you
Some
know what?
compliments for you, you know, every morning as you leave the house.
That's it. I mean, wouldn't it be wonderful to go through life being told what we want to hear? But would you grow and evolve as a person?
Yeah,
Not.
it's quite
Um,
high profile examples of how that definitely wouldn't happen.
I think we all can, you know, imagine that. But so, you know, I think that can apply to lots of other AI. It depends what you want from it, and that's why, like I say, it does a good job of it does a really good job of some types of content that are, you know, explainers and breaking things down and well structured things and, you know, all of that sort of stuff. It does it well. But if that's all you want out of content, then that's fine. But if you want things
Yeah.
that will tug on the heartstrings, make people, you know, feel something different, consider another point of view, learn something, feel inspired, feel goosebumps, then that's where, you know, it kind of is invariably going to hit the mark.
It takes me back to the early days of, you know, like before the internet, which I was not born before, by the way. But, you know, in the early days of the internet, I should say, neither of us are that old. You know, before advertising models took over and the whole sort of commercial side of it became a big thing, the you know, the kind of principles of like real marketing and like people just doing fun stuff because you could, you know, to your point about playing around with new tools, like you remember when, you know, Facebook launched and when YouTube launched and stuff, they were all like new and people just did things because they were fun. And then like the advertising models and the algorithms kind of descended on everything and created the kind of echo chamber situation that we're in now, where things are, I would say, broadly very much less fun and very much more commercially driven. I kind of feel like that's, you know, that's something that we lost online, which I know, like, you know, Tim Berners-Lee writes a lot about this and is sort of, you know, bemoaning the state of the internet as a whole currently. But you know, from your past experience as a brand person and current experience as a writer, I think we've swung back the other way now, where a lot of the conversations I'm having are, as you were just saying about your briefs as well, people are sort of coming back to like, oh, well, how do we stand out from all the generic online stuff? Like, how do we actually like represent our brand properly? And like, I know the internet was largely a force for sort of not destroying, but definitely sort of ate away at a lot of that classic, what you might call traditional marketing thinking, right? So like, are you seeing the same thing in the kind of briefs that you're getting? And back to what you were saying about how you guys work, Brooke, you know, you've got a very senior team of people who get all this stuff. Like that to me is becoming ironically a bit of a USP now. The fact that like, I'm similar to you. I'm like, I get brand, I get marketing, but I also know how to do like internet stuff. So, marrying them together, but leaning more into the brand side is now what makes a lot of our stuff work, which seems very basic, but, it's quite amusing that we seem to have come full circle from my point of view.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. Like distinctiveness or differentiation are the things that I think I think brands are really going to be focusing more on, because the demand for a velocity of content, is very much at the forefront of everyone's mind. We've got to create. We've got to be putting so much out so that we remain competitive and we remain top of mind. But with volume can come dilution. So how do you remain distinctive and versus your competitors when you're operating on that massive scale? So I think, yes, circling back to brand and having a really clear brand positioning, brand assets, brand voice, those things, brands and brand stories, specific, running through that, how those are the things that become really important, and will increasingly kind of, as you say, that circle will come back again.
Yeah, it's interesting here, because I think, are you seeing, I suppose, similar things in that, having worked online for a long time now, there still seems to be a bit of a feeling that like everybody still needs to be everywhere, like in every channel and doing everything. And obviously I'm broad brushing it a bit here, but like obviously with marketing budgets are still being cut a fair bit, like especially down here, I think they've gone down like 2 or 3% over the last 3 or 4 years. And exactly to your point, I think, I'm seeing a lot of people who are stressing about being stretched too thin, or like, still trying to do too much. Whereas for the past kind of 7 or 8 years, I've been in startups where the situation's a little bit different, but the end goal is the same. And we've like built those up in only 2 or 3 channels and just stayed really focused. And it just strikes me as surprising that I don't see that same line of thinking in much bigger businesses who, actually have the kind of brand power and presence to be like, well, no, we could just turn off like these 4 channels over here and it probably won't make any difference. But people seem very scared of making that call, which I found a bit odd, given that they're under a lot of commercial pressure.
Yeah, I agree. I think I'm a big fan of the 80-20 rule, and putting your efforts behind what works 80% of the time, and I think you're right. I do see a lot of companies investing very broadly, a smattering across a lot of different channels, when really it's a case of looking at what's really, really performing, and just going, putting all the effort behind that. Email marketing is one of those things as well, which, so often falls to the bottom of the pile, and people are still so hesitant to invest, but you can, so often it's got the biggest ROI, and it's so unglamorous.
Yeah.
And it's not Threads, and it's not Instagram, and it's not all of the shiny new things. Email marketing like actually performs really well. So it's like you just do a good job of that, and you can cut out half the that links out to some really good website content, and a lot of the time you're laughing. So keeping it really simple, I'm a big advocate for that. Whether you've got a huge amount to spend or a little amount to spend, just keeping it simple.
Yeah, I'm fully behind that line of thinking as well. And I think, as a reader of your own, newsletters, Brooke, like I think it's as you were saying, it's a way to get my pleasure. I enjoy them. I enjoy them when they come through. I think it's like exactly as you're saying. The reason that I like them though is because they share, that you obviously write them, and it's a great way to share like your actual personality as well as what's happening in your world from a business point of view. So I just I quite like that. Most of the ones I get are like SaaS email sequence number 3, where I might have like once had a demo 3 years ago, or I downloaded something, and it's just, boilerplate, like, did you see we're doing a thing now? Like, just, I don't even bother unsubscribing now. I just kind of filter them all out to somewhere where I never read them. So like, it's it seems like a very underutilized channel to me, but I think, like you say, it's just not very exciting, unfortunately. But then weirdly, as I'm sure you're well aware, a lot of the challenges that marketers have is that they're not taken that seriously necessarily, and they're not often viewed as commercially savvy people. But it's exactly because of that line of thinking, right? Where like they'll probably go into a board meeting and be rambling on about threads and why we should be on there, instead of being like, well, we could just email our customer database and probably like reactivate 20% of them or whatever.
Honestly, you could probably do, and like I say, obviously every company's different, and email marketing isn't the solution to everything. But as an example,
only it was.
As an example, though, you'll probably post for a year on threads before you ever see, as exciting as it is, before, or you could send one EDM and you'll probably see an instant ROI on it. You know what I mean? It's just, I just think it's worth thinking about, like, doing that due diligence of an audit of all your channels and what's performing, and what delivers the best ROI, and making decisions based around that.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, look, we could probably ramble on about this all day, so I won't whinge on too long about it. But I completely agree, and I think coming back to what you were saying, and obviously the area that you and your team are operating in, it pays to also focus on those areas where you can get your message across in a more engaged and detailed manner, right? I mean, like, email is the original, and before that, direct mail, right, was the place to be like, here's who we are, here's what we do. You've got someone's attention is captured, you're in their inbox or their physical hand with a letter or whatever. So like, it surely makes sense, right? It's not like, as you said, on threads, someone's going to read like, what, 200-300 words of some garbage that you've just pushed out, and then it will be gone immediately. Like, it's, the level of attention engagement is nowhere near the same for the volume of work required. It seems very odd that people don't seem to get that.
Yeah, I mean, look,
maybe I'm a cynic about it. I don't know.
Yeah. Look, and I think with email, I mean, we probably are getting slightly sidetracked, but with email, it's such a privilege that somebody has given you their email address because they have invited you into their personal world. And, when they open it as well, that is an indication that they are genuinely interested in what you have to say. And so you have to take that privilege very seriously. And I think that it can become really, really powerful if you understand that privilege and you use it in the right way.
Yeah, totally. And look, bringing it back around to our friends, the language models, and the potential sort of next stages for how I think AI models broadly can help you. We're seeing a lot of that now, and we do a lot of this with our own kind of audience and customer data. Like, that kind of relationship analysis is where I'm seeing a big opportunity to actually leverage things like the language models to say, look, if you've been email communicating with people for a year and you've got a ton of responses and metrics and blah blah blah, like exactly as you were saying earlier, that kind of analysis to say, look, who are our most engaged customers, who responded back to us, like what did they respond to, like that sort of thing. I feel like is where they're not very sexy but more pragmatic and useful functional areas are that these models can fill. Like, what are you seeing in terms of the opportunities for you from here, Brooke? Like, what are you most excited about, either language model focused or otherwise, in the space at the moment?
Look, I'm excited to see it grow in relevance. So like we kind of talked about, I think there's a whole chunk of information and perspective that is currently missing on it. So I think the greatest opportunity for us to learn is when it actually fully wields that international, gender diverse, all the different perspectives that the world can hold, that if we can actually tap into all of that, that could be pretty wonderful.
Yeah.
Because at the moment it's I almost have this mental picture in my mind of who the robot is and looks like. It's a very limited view, I
Bit of
feel.
dangerous personification happening there.
Yeah,
Maybe you do need an AI companion, bro.
yeah, maybe. Yeah, listen. But I think it's, so I think that that's really interesting when that becomes more well-rounded. I think that's really interesting. And I enjoy and then in terms of what else is interesting, I actually really am loving the fact that the clients are saying, how can we use AI? Because it pushes us to really look at different ways that we can integrate it and ultimately create a greater velocity of content, but at a higher quality. And so that's the bit that is our job as writers and as an agency, is to go, okay, how do we make sure that we're ramping up the velocity, but that it's quality and it's not just more words into the wind.
Yeah, I mean, look, that's obviously a challenge that I'm sure you're very aware of, right? Is like the quantity over quality issue, which has been a problem on the internet for quite some time, I guess. Yeah, I mean, I think you're fighting the good fight there, right, with your team to try and avoid that. I think as long as people are still pushing in that direction, hopefully we'll be safe.
Absolutely.
So look, following on from that, like, talk to me about what are your kind of big predictions in this space for you, or more broadly, in the industry. What do you think is going to happen for the rest of this year? Like, do you think that the models are going to get better or worse? Are we going to see any, horrific missteps, a la Elon Musk currently destroying Twitter? Like, what do you think is going to happen in the online space? Yeah. Oh, sorry, I should say, but X, has it been renamed now to X.com or whatever he's rebranded it as? Just a super savvy move there.
Yes. Look, I mean, all of the above. I do think it's going to get better, and I do think that there's the inevitable. There's going to be some big oopses that happen, and
Yeah.
I think that that's going to make for massively entertaining, viewing. I think that. I think that there will be a higher value placed on thought leadership, on humanness, on people. And, I mean, if we think about the word influencer, how that really only kind of entered into the vernacular. Like, they were always just they were editors, they were editors and they were celebrities. And then all of a sudden, 10, 15 years ago, there started to be influencers. I think that the value of influencers will change. And there will hopefully be a demand for more, I guess, knowledge-based influencers, who can share their own personal insights and experiences, and kind of elevating not just not just leaders, but also the other people in businesses and brands that have interesting perspective and things to share. So yeah, I think that's kind of my predictions is that the value of thought leadership, unique voices, and human perspective will become higher, because inevitably brands are going to need to stand out in some way, and that's their best way to do it.
Wow. Yeah, I think it's a pretty epic and accurate summary, Brooke. That's an amazing way to round up there. What do you think the first big misstep is going to be, based on what you were saying? Now that you've talked through the positives, have you got any ideas, or are you not sure at the moment?
Well, I think that there will be inevitable missteps and I hope this isn't the case, but obviously there's some significant interested parties that are all trying to group together to kind of resolve some of the major issues, the copyright issues, the inaccuracies, the potential problems, and I think that I think that that's really difficult to navigate because those interested parties have huge financial vested interests in it. So it kind of doesn't, it just can't. I don't think it can be well navigated when they have that level of financial investment in the outcome, right? So,
Yeah.
how that gets managed, I think, is so important. But just seems a bit of a shit show at the moment, to be fair.
Yeah. Yeah. Look, I think I would agree with that assessment. I think the altruistic and the commercial aims are fairly far apart right now, right? And
Mm.
probably won't get any closer together, I would
No,
imagine.
no. So who steps in? Whose role is it? How do you monitor that? How do you do that globally? Like, they still haven't worked out how to fix the internet issues globally, and we've had the internet for a very long time. So how do you
Yeah.
actually fix the AI issues is the big question. And so I have no doubt that there's going to be a lot of missteps and potentially some interesting scenarios that fall out of that.
Wow. Well, bloody hell. On that bombshell, Brooke, it's probably about time to wrap up. I feel like I'm just teeing up another 3 or 4 conversations there. But look, I think that was very interesting point to end on, Brooke. Look, thanks for coming on and talking through the real world impact and implications. It was a pleasure to chat to you, and I feel like we need to
Yeah.
talk again now based on the ending of that
Yeah.
conversation.
Maybe my next book should be a dystopian one.
Well, exactly, yeah. You can, now that you've G'd up all the kids, you can depress them all with
Yeah.
a sort of dystopian future version of here's what your life will be like from this point onwards. A robot slave. That'll be it.
I'm making notes already.
I like it. I like it. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Brooke. There were some super interesting takeaways there. This, I'm afraid, is the end of the show. I think the key thing that I took away from that discussion was that the human connection and human spirit, I guess, won't be replaced anytime soon, but we can hopefully reflect it more effectively with our AI friends as they continue to evolve. If you would like to hear more about who we are and what we do, please head over to our website, theflowstate.io.